Hello, welcome to the Writer's Corner, presented by Easy Writer Pro, the software to allow you to create ebooks and regular books from inside the same package. Today we have the pleasure of talking to an editor because one of the things I think we need to know as writers is how to work with an editor and what an editor can do for us. Today we're going to have Belea Keneey join us. And she's an editor, and she's going to talk a lot about editing. Welcome, Belea.
Hello, Drew. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
My pleasure, or our pleasure, actually, for all the people that are watching, all the writers. Well, let me just get right into it. How did you get into editing, and why did you do that?
My first foray into editing was actually doing beta reading and proofreading when I was involved with fan fiction. And for people who are not familiar with fan fiction, that is when you write in somebody else's already created universe and you write without the intent of making a profit. So for me personally, I started out working in Star Wars fan fiction, writing about Han and Luke and Darth Vader and people like that. And once I got past beta reading, I started doing proofreading and light copy editing and realized that one, I was pretty good at it, and two, I really enjoyed it. So I made the transition to professional editing in about 2006, and I've been doing it ever since.
Oh, great. You referred to a couple different things there. Are there different types of editing, and how is editing different from proofreading? You mentioned proofreading as well. Could you make that distinction for us so we could really get an understanding of all those different pieces?
Sure, absolutely. A lot of people will use the term proofreading when they really mean a copy edit. And one of the distinctions I make is between a developmental editor, where that person, when I do developmental editing, what I'm looking at is the whole story structure, the overall logic of how it flows, whether or not the characterization works and it works consistently, how the setting interacts with all of the scenes and that type of thing. And that is not looking at mechanical items like grammar, spelling, punctuation, the raw mechanics of writing and writing so that people can understand you. And people also use the term proofreading. Proofreading is actually technically reading from A to B and making sure that B absolutely matches A. In traditional publishing, proofreading is used what they call page proofs, where literally it will have gone from a file in a Word document to a PDF to an InDesign document that needs to be checked against what the editor and the proofreader's marks were, whatever changes they had asked for. So these days there's not as much proofreading going on, particularly with people who are writing fiction or people who are self-publishing, because you're not generally generating a hard copy. It's strictly in digital files. There is still proofreading that goes on, certainly in academic publishing, any educational publishing, scientific journals, that kind of thing. There's less of true proofreading going on in genre fiction and fiction publishing. Does that help? Does that sort of make sense?
Yeah, that does make sense. Now what about for somebody who's writing a business book? And that I assume that would make it, whether you did proofreading or not, would be determined partially by what format it's in, whether it's going to be an ebook or a physical book. Is that correct?
Correct. Yeah, you can do proofreading. I mean, certainly even for an ebook, you can certainly create a PDF or print out page proofs. It's just unusual these days, and most people don't want to spend the money to do it. For a business book or a scientific journal or kind of what they call serious nonfiction, page proofs are pretty much the norm. Proofreading at that point is also too looking beyond things like spelling and punctuation, those sort of mechanical errors. And proofreading is looking also at the layout and how the pages flow. Did a word on page 312 get mixed or repeated on page 313? Do the headers and the footers match? It's much more kind of granular and nitty-gritty, looking at the purpose is to make sure the final product is attractive and everything flows right. You've got tables and figures and captions and photos. The proofreader would be going through and making sure all those numbers and captions, match up with what they're supposed to. Whereas a copy editor is going to work looking more for spelling, mechanics, punctuation, that kind of thing.
Okay. Well, there is an aspect of proofreading that I've run across in doing ebooks, and that is that there is a way to create a preview before you upload the ebook. And
Yes. Yes.
that's probably very similar to what you're talking. It sounds like that's similar to what you're
Mm-hmm.
talking about.
Yeah, because probably what you're doing is you're taking that preview and comparing it to your Word document or your WordPerfect file, whatever file you created and actually finalized, and that you're going to be checking from the Word to your preview mode for the ebook program. So it still goes on, and it's absolutely it's absolutely required because as writers, when we're doing our own writing and telling our own stories, we cannot see our own errors. Your brain fills in what you think you meant to say, and a cold set of eyes on a document is probably going to find things that you wouldn't have noticed. The things that I notice the most are homonym issues, there, and there, or pedal, P-E-D-A-L, P-E-T-A-L, that kind of thing that your brain just kind of fills it in for you. My favorite typo of all time was in a traditionally published book, and this was years ago. This was back when they were doing on paper copy edits and proofreading. It was in a Jonathan Kellerman book, which is a big mystery writer. I mean, he's a doctor, he's well educated, but somebody made the mistake somewhere, and it got through. He was referencing a horse trail, which is bridle path, B-R-I-D-L-E. But in the book, it was B-R-I-D-A-L, and it just cracked me up no end. I smile about it every time I think about it. It's kind of a funny error, but that proves to you that errors get in, even in books published by the Big Five.
Well, now you told us one of the benefits of having an editor, which is that fresh set of eyes. Are there other benefits of having an editor?
Yes, I think so, because an editor that you hire as opposed to an editor who's a friend or a former classmate or a family member, an editor who you hire for their professional expertise should be able to be pretty honest with you and tell you straight up whether or not something is working or not. As a person with my clients, I don't have an emotional connection to them. I don't know where the story came from. I don't know the people they're writing about. I don't know the level of interest or passion they have about the topic. What I have is what's actually on the page, and I can help the writer determine, does this work well for what message you're trying to convey? For somebody that's writing an autobiography, but they fictionalized it. If I don't know them as a person, I don't care if it's fictionalized or not. I can tell them, character A is kind of blah and bland. Can you rev up that person a little more? When in fact, character A might be a real person, but as a professional and somebody who's not, again, emotionally involved or doesn't know the writer, to me, it's all just fiction. It either works or it doesn't. So I can be kind of brutally honest that way, but I'm not mean about it.
Okay. Well, let me ask you another question here. What advice can you give an author of fiction or nonfiction before and during the writing of his or her book?
Well, the first piece of advice I would have was have a sense of who your audience is. Have a sense of what market are you trying to reach. Say for somebody who's doing middle grade readers, and that's going to be, it's like from grade 5 to grade 8. Somebody who's trying to reach that audience is clearly going to have probably a different subject matter, a different tone, a different voice, and a different point of view than somebody who's writing sword and sorcery fantasy with a lot of gore and heads being chopped off, Game of Thrones kind of stuff. You've got to know what your audience is looking for, how you want to reach the audience, and then adjust your writing and adjust what you're doing in the story to reach that audience. So that would be the first thing I would advise people to think ahead, is what audience are you trying to reach. And most of the work that I do is on fiction. Some of this applies to nonfiction as well, particularly narrative nonfiction, where again you're telling a story. Something like Seabiscuit or In the Garden of Good and Evil, that was very much narrative nonfiction. It had a story that went somewhere and had an ending and a climax. So even for that kind of nonfiction, you need to have a sense of what point of view do you want to use? Which head are you going to perceive the story through? Are you going to do omniscient and try to do everybody's and tell the story from outside? Are you going to do first person and tell it from the I perspective, the I narrator, or a third person. You're going to jump around in between different characters using third person. That decision, particularly for a fiction writer, influences every word you write. So that you want to have a sense of ahead of time, instead of jumping into a novel and doing 350 or 400 pages and then realizing, oh, geez, that should have been first person. I have to rewrite every page now. So that's something else to think about before you start writing or while you're developing the start of the story.
Let me ask you something. Just kind of I'm going to take a left turn with you here,
Sure.
and ask you. I'm writing some business books. What level should I write those books for? Do
You
you
mean
have
as far as
any?
like reading level you're talking about?
Yeah, I'm talking reading level, and how should I approach that in terms of my audience? Because if I'm writing a business book, my audience could be 18 or they could be 75.
Right, right. Well, my first question to you would be what is your market, as far as which specific readers of business books are you looking for? Are you looking for somebody that's looking for advice on starting their own business, who wants to be an entrepreneur? Are you looking to write for people that are trying to get in through corporate America and getting into a job that way? Are you writing for management? Probably. Are you writing for the average worker bee who wants to move up into management? You still want to scale your message based on what audience you're trying to reach. And, from a realistic point of view, you have to keep in mind, how much do they already know about the topic? Somebody that's already read 40 gazillion business books and is 55 years old is going to have different needs in a book than somebody who's just starting out in her career and is 27 years old and has only read, what was required to be read in her college courses. So that would influence the way you write as well. Does that
Okay,
make
thank
sense?
you.
Does that follow?
Yeah, that's helpful. Um, what should a writer look for when that writer picks an editor?
When you're picking an editor, one thing you want to keep in mind is ask yourself, what kind of editing are you looking for? Are you looking for a developmental editor? Are you looking for somebody that's going to help you with the story structure, who can read the whole, say it's a novel, read the whole thing through and give you a feel for, chapter 3 should really be chapter 16, and this character, Johnny, is just the same as Jimmy. So Jimmy and Johnny, one or the other, can go away. Somebody who looks at the big picture, you want to have a sense of that. Is that the kind of editing and feedback that you're looking for? Or if you're happy with the story and you know that it's set up the way you want it to go, the characters are doing what you want and they're consistent, you might be looking for a copy editor, and you're not sure about the commas and the semicolons and the dangling participle thing and all those scary phrases that you kind of heard back in English class back in the day, but you're not really sure what they mean anymore. That's fine. A copy editor can help you do that. And a proofreader would be at the very end. Proofreading technically is done after copy editing. It's going to be after all the other changes have been made, and the proofreader is going to check and make sure that A matches B and that your actual design of the book is flowing correctly. Your headers and footers are right, your chapter numbers are correct, the spacing is correct, that kind of thing.
Okay, that makes sense. So let's say I hire an editor. What should I be ready to provide the editor for that editor to do a great job with my book?
Well, you should be able to give the editor a sense of who you're writing for. What is the goal of this writing project? Do you want to sell a fast-paced thriller that you hope, breaks out and sells 500,000 copies like other people have done with ebooks? Are you just writing for your family? You're doing sort of a family biography that you're telling the story that you think is probably only going to appeal to 20 or 30 people that will ever see it? Or are you, writing for a completely different audience? So a sense of your market and how sophisticated that market is as far as, reading and studying is. And you also want to provide, if you're doing copy editing, a style sheet. The style sheet is going to list, say, all the locations and their proper spellings and where they are, even if they're fictional. Pineville Is that Pineville with an E on the end, or Pineville no E? Pineville could be Penville. You want to make sure that everything is detailed on a document so your copy editor can make sure that those things are right. Items like what the characters look like. Somebody who's blonde on page 27 should probably not be a brunette on page 87 unless he or she is deliberately in disguise and trying to change their hair color, something like that. So that sort of information you want. And then also a sense of which professional style guide to use. Like most fiction publishing houses use the Chicago Manual of Style, and that calls for serial commas, spelling out numbers, rules about how to hyphenate words, that sort of thing. So give your editor something to work with. If you don't care, you can certainly say so, and then the editor can say, for future projects, I use Chicago Manual of Style. If you do future stories in the universe or a sequel, you want to use, the same style guide. So have that in place. And also, too, this just happened to me again this week, is send your best final document. Once it's sent to the editor and we start working on it, we don't want to get something 2 weeks later. Oh, and by the way, I've made some changes. Work on this one. No, I've already started working on document A. I can't start over again on document B unless you're willing to pay me to start over again on document B. So once it's the best, you know how to make it. You've done your best. You cleaned it up. What you're capable of doing. Then hand it off to the editor and let go for a while. You've already got your deadline. You've got your contract in place. Just let go for a while and relax and let the editor do his or her work. Then you can, see the changes later and decide what you want to do with them.
Okay, now when you make changes, how do you communicate back to the writer? Because you said here we make changes here. Here's the package. I send it to you. You start to make those changes. I assume, since we live in a digital age, that you're not going to use all the proofreading symbols and send me back a paper copy of it.
Correct. I do not personally work on hard copy. I do have editor friends who are willing to do it. I'm not willing to do it. I would only work in digital myself. And most publishing houses use Word as their initial document. And Word has a neat little function called track changes, which shows every comma that's added or everything that's deleted or taken away. It gives you the opportunity to put a little comment bubble, and you can question the author. It's spelled Sarah here, S-A-R-A, and it's S-A-R-A-H on page 37, which is correct. If you're not given a style guide, you have to question the author. So there's plenty of opportunity for back and forth with track changes. And that also puts the power in the author's hands that you can accept or reject a change that I make. If you decide that, no, cell phone should be one word instead of 2 words, you can go through the whole document and make cell phone, spell the way that you want to spell it. So it gives you a lot of flexibility, and it also lets you accept all changes. If you want a clean document really fast and you know your editor and you're comfortable with the changes they made, you can just whoosh, clean it up and take it, and it's ready to go. So Word track changes is what I use. I believe WordPerfect has some functionality that way, but it's certainly not as strong as Word. So that's the one that most of us use.
Great, thanks. Now, okay, so now I've got my manuscript together. I've sent it to you. I know how we're going to work back and forth. So we've already signed a contract, but I kind of skipped over a step here. What are some typical rates? Or are there typical rates for editors? And I assume that there's probably a variety of a great deal of variation depending upon the number of pages, the type of material, those kinds of things. But are there any general rules of thumb that you could give us?
It is difficult to say because the subject matter, the experience of the editor that you're working with, people that work on like the really nitty-gritty mathematics, scientific, health sciences, that sort of editing for, say, the academic journals, their rates are higher generally than people who are working on, genre fiction and narrative nonfiction, because they have a kind of a higher skill set and more depth of knowledge on something that's kind of esoteric and quirky. So if you're doing high-level scientific academic work, you should probably expect to pay more than somebody who's working on genre fiction. I belong to an organization called the Editorial Freelancers Association, and they have a resource for writers that has a list of suggested rates or kind of ballpark figures that you can work from. From what I've seen on that chart, it's skewed toward people in New York. So to me, the rates are pretty high. I would say, for the most part, people that are in non-New York locations are probably charging a little bit less than that. But that's that's up to you, between you and the editor. You negotiate that rate. And typically, when I'm setting a rate for somebody, it's because I've done a sample edit on their work. They've sent me 5 or 10 pages of their material, and I've done, gone through and done my thing that I'm going to do on it, and then I check on my timing and get a feel for, okay, if I could do 10 pages in an hour, it's a 300-page document, blah, 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 30 hours plus cleanup, 35. I can come up with a number based on that. I would estimate that most people are willing to do a sample edit, and that lets you see how the editor works, what level of edits they're making, if you're comfortable communicating with the person, and that kind of thing. So it varies. Proofreading is, for me, it's a little bit less than doing on a copy edit, and a copy edit is less than doing a developmental edit. So I would say, on average, for the work that I do and the authors I work with, they're generally professional writers. They're quick on turnarounds. They're very efficient. They give me final manuscripts, and they follow my schedule. So I'm usually able to do things for about 2 cents a word or less. That's in general. I mean, there are some authors I had to charge a little bit more for, but that's kind of a general rate of how I work. Some people charge by the hour, some people charge by the page. I find that charging by the word is best for me.
Okay, great. Let me ask you a couple other questions. One of them is doesn't actually have to do with editing, but it has to do with writing. I understand you just recently completed a book called The Tiger Whisperer. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
I did. I had the novel published this summer. It came out in June, and it's about a tiger loose in Tampa, and it's based on some of the real-life big cat rescues that are in the U.S. A lot of people are probably aware that tigers are an endangered species, and there's probably a little over 3,000 in the wild, mostly in the former Russia, China, India, some in Vietnam. So of the about 3,000 or so in the wild, in contrast, there's the USDA estimates there's over 5,000 in captivity in the United States. And if you're in a major metropolitan area, you're probably within 40 miles of a tiger, whether you know it or not. So I found the whole topic really interesting. And yeah, it's a chase story. The tiger gets out, people chasing, chaos ensues, blah, blah, blah. So it's called The Tiger Whisperer, and it's available in ebook and print now. Thank you for asking me about it. I appreciate it.
Sure. Well, I think that might be a book that a number of people are interested in. That's quite a topic.
I think it's fascinating. I'm always surprised when people are not fascinated by the same things I am. But I think tigers are just, some of the coolest things on the planet, are tigers. They're just way, way cool.
Do you do any writing classes or help people with editing by doing any training?
I do have some writing classes coming up. I have a memoir class I'm teaching with Alice Osborne in October. That's going to be in Raleigh. And I just got done working out arrangements to teach a class on writing fantasy, science fiction, and horror for Wake Tech. And that will start in February of 2015. And I also do writing coaching and working one-on-one with authors, instead of, not all my work comes from publishing houses. Some of it I like working with authors one-on-one. So I do that as well.
Now, what kind of manuscripts do you like to edit? What kinds of things are you looking for in terms of an editor that you really enjoy?
I definitely like working on genre fiction, things like mysteries, romance, paranormal, horror, that kind of thing. I do narrative nonfiction as well, and I tend to look at it with a fiction editor's eye, in that I'm looking for a story, even in narrative nonfiction. I mentioned Seabiscuit and In the Midnight of Garden of Good and Evil. Those were two of the big sellers that sort of started the trend with narrative nonfiction, in that they're talking about facts, they're talking about real people, they're talking about actual events, but the writing is structured in such a way that it's like a movie or a story on screen. So I work on those as well. My favorite is probably paranormal and horror, though. That's kind of the stuff that I read even when I'm off the job. I'll tend to pick up something like that. So those are my favorites.
Well, let us know how we can get in touch with you to find out more about your classes, or if we want to talk to you about editing and perhaps hire you, or get just a little bit more information about your editing.
Sure, sure. I have a website that's www.beleakeneey.com, and my email is belea@beleakeneey.com. And as long as you put a subject line in there that says something about, editing or asking about editing, something like that, I'll open it up. If it's a weird subject line and I don't recognize your name, I may not open it. So you have to, let me know in the subject line that I'm somebody I need to open up the email from. And I was thinking of something else while we were talking about when you go to pick an editor. Is it okay? Can I backtrack? Is that all right?
Sure. Oh yeah, that's fine. In fact, I was going to ask you if there's anything we missed.
Okay, great, great. One of the things I also tell writers is when you're looking for an editor is find somebody who, one, likes the type of story that you're telling, and two, has an experience in that kind of story. If you're writing a paranormal or a romance, you don't necessarily want to team up with an editor who only does academic work for Oxford University Press or for Duke University Press. You want somebody that's got some experience in the type of story that you're telling. And you can get pretty granular with that. I mean, even somebody who does, say, thrillers may not be the kind of person that wants to do a romance. And that you can usually find out by, obviously emailing, communicating with the editor, looking at his or her website. They'll usually give you a sense of what kind of stories have I worked on in the past. These are the kind of books that I like. If your editor hates romance, you don't want to ask them to work on a romance because they're not necessarily going to enjoy the story, and they may not be the best person to sort of know the genre and get a feel for what's going on in the market with romances right now. So it helps to match up the kind of story you're doing with the editor that you want to work with. So that's something to keep in mind, just something that popped to my head when we were talking.
Okay. Anything else any last words you want to leave us with about editing or using an editor that come to mind before we close down Writer's Corner for August?
Well, my advice would be, if you haven't done it before, if you've never been edited, and you're concerned about the investment in time or money, you might want to think about just trying it with a short story. It's say you got a story that's 20 or 25 pages, or maybe a chapter that's sort of, a story in itself and can stand on its own. Try working with an editor on something shorter first, and that'll give you a feel for how the process works and how it is to work with that particular person. It is, when we write novels, they become our babies in a sense, and we get kind of emotionally attached to them. And it's hard to let go and let somebody else work on them sometimes. I have to say, as a writer, I understand that. That's part of the reason I like working one-on-one with authors, that I feel like I can come up with a team approach and make the story better without the writer feeling like, oh, I've taken over and told a different story. I don't want to tell a different story. I want you to tell your story in a way that's smoother, easier to read, more accessible to readers, and is hopefully going to be more successful for you. So that's my goal when I edit.
Well, thank you. This has been very enlightening for me as a writer, and I think probably for a number of other writers out there, because many of us have not published yet or are in the process of publishing and haven't actually gone through the formal experience of having something edited by a professional editor. We've had it done by a friend or a family member or whatever. So I think that there's a lot to chew on in what we discussed today. And I really appreciate your time, Belea, and appreciate your flexibility. It took a couple times to get this
of course, yeah,
to work exactly the way we wanted it to. But I think we've captured some important information.
Yeah, I hope it's helpful, and people are welcome to contact me by email or through my website. I'd be glad to answer any further questions. Glad to help.
Okay, well that concludes the Writer's Corner for August of 2014, brought to you by Easy Writer Pro, the software that you can use to create and publish your work. And we will see you next month. Take care now.